David, how many million customers go through Tesco stores sorry, it's a bit of an exam question, but it is in the millions, isn't it?
Globally, several tens of millions.
Several tens of millions. What should Tesco do to encourage those tens of millions to themselves lead greener lives?
If I were to pick just one thing, in addition to the things that we've been talking about, it would be help provide better, trustworthy information about the sustainability impact. And I agree with your point just now, Harriet. We're at the beginning of a journey, so it's difficult to judge the effectiveness of the journey when you're at the beginning of it. But consumers will, I think, once we get through the recession, continue to demand products that are more sustainable in the broad definition of the word.
David, sorry to interrupt you because you're in mid-flow. That rather indicates that the recession has had the opposite effect, that it's reduced people's either desire or ability to make the kind of decisions you're saying. Sorry to interrupt, but if you could just address that.
I think the 2 points you made are exactly right. It hasn't reduced people's desire; it's reduced their ability. And people can't afford to exercise their desire to be green, and therefore they'll talk about it less and they hear less about it. When we get through that, I think people will be able to refocus more on making sure that what they buy, what they consume is sustainable. Now, the thing that's on our side, our side collectively, is that information, whether it's through the media, what businesses provide themselves, what NGOs provide, what people like Harriet help us to understand, is increasing. I mean, it's just increased massively over the 10 years or so that I was at Tesco. Our supply chains are now more transparent than they've ever been before. They're going to continue to be more transparent. I'm an optimist in that I think that people will go on and say, I want what I buy to be sustainable, whether it's economically sustainable, socially, or environmentally, and we will compete to provide that.
So Harriet,
can I come to this question of the recession, because I think it's really interesting, and I think many people expected sustainability issues to drop off the agenda when the recession came. And I think the opposite's been the case, actually. Of course, David's right. If people have less money in their pockets and they're more worried, they're not going to make big investments, putting in solar panels on their house or something. But actually, public support for sustainability has, if anything, gone up. Because I think it chimes with the public mood. There was a time when the public were running after always bigger is better, more bling. And there's now a sense of actually, in the difficult times, you go back to your core values. It's great having the musical background, isn't it? I'm going to swell to a climax.
Harriet, it's the first time you've had the Brigade of Guards as your backing group.
I must do it more often. And when you're really worried in a recession about your family, if anything, brings home to you even more what's life like for a farmer who grows bananas or coffee, and you actually feel, if anything, more sympathy. And the public mood has shifted from status to substance. And they're really looking to companies to answer them on that core agenda. So they haven't got the money to do it themselves. They want companies to play their part more. So as I think previously, definitely, it was more driven by a more elite group, if you like, who did have more money, ready to buy premium products from premium brands. And now I think it's a much more widespread mood, and they're looking to all the companies to make it part of the everyday way they do business.
Richard?
I would absolutely endorse what Harriet says, and I would also make the point of the business case for sustainability, because I think there was a misconception that the business case involves large sums of investment and no return. Certainly in the last 5 years, we set off on that journey thinking that this was going to be a net investment or a net expenditure. Last year alone, the net benefit to the organisation was in excess of £100 million. And you don't have to think too deeply to understand where that comes from. If you take a quarter of your electricity out, if you take a quarter of your vehicles off the road, if you save half of your clothing packaging, if you take 20% out of the food packaging, if you reduce your carrier bag usage by 80%, then you're getting significant reductions. And I think the UK retail sector particularly, and it was mentioned that it's the third largest in the world, it's probably one of the most competitive in the world. The UK retail sector has shown leadership in this space. The vigorous competitive environment in which we all operate has driven us all to compete on not just the normal rules of retailing, but also how we create an ever more efficient business built on strong, sustainable, long-term sustainable principles, given that we all know and we all see significant changes both in the customers' demographic and the availability of...
Richard, that's a great answer, but not to the question. The question was how can you encourage your customers to lead greener lives?
I think the first step is your own business. As Rita said, you have to live this yourself. There is no good putting a wind turbine on your shop and it not being about what you are as a business. So it has to be part of what you are as a brand. So we're very clear, getting our own house in order, understanding the issues, and then bringing it to the consumer. Then I think we have a number of levers. We have choice editing. So we only sell free-range eggs, we only sell free-range ingredient eggs, we only sell Fairtrade coffee, we only sell Fairtrade tea, we only source certified sustainable fish, etc., etc., etc. So there is choice editing. Then there are other levers. Then there are incentives. So in the last few years, we've been exercised by the linear nature of the clothing business. Harvest, manufacture, retail, use, disposal. And there are, in the time we've been sitting here, tens of thousands of garments have gone to landfill in the UK. Now, we don't see that as long-term sustainable, and therefore we have a desire to change the model. And in the last few years, with new partners like Oxfam, we've managed to engage the consumer in something that, when highlighted to them, is very obvious. Waste, it doesn't make sense, it's relevant, it's in my space. It's not an abstract concept about agricultural standards in a faraway place, it's very relevant. And therefore engaging people in that process makes a real difference. What does that mean? It means we've got trial products in the market, and we had a coat on the market last year, which was made of recycled wool and cashmere fibres from jumpers. The retail price of that was less than a standard wool and cashmere. Did it say, this is a recyclable coat, wear it if you're worthy? No. It said, this is autographed, this is on trend, this is military, this is double-breasted, this is a fantastic quality coat, and by the way, it's 20 or 30 pounds cheaper than a comparable quote on the market. And that's, I think, how we see engaging consumers in sustainability going forward.
I love the phrase choice editing, by the way. I've made a special note of that. John, your business is very tightly focused, isn't it? I mean, in what way can you encourage the gluggers of your product to lead greener lives?
Well, again, I think the first act of business is to make sure we have it right in our own house. And then secondly, we need to play it across the entire value chain, which means all the way from our suppliers, with whom we have a very aggressive sustainability program. They now understand it's no longer just price, quality, and service, that it's sustainability. And if they don't play the right game on sustainability, the other three are irrelevant. And it's working importantly with our customers across the entire chain, which we're aggressively and actively doing. You've got to have all of that in place, I think, first. Even though consumers are interested, as we've been talking, in sustainability, they're not really interested in sustainability at a higher price, generally speaking. And so it's our job, I think, business, governments, and NGOs all working together to figure out how do we get consumer education even higher. And for us, one of the big areas there is recycling. We are committed, as you heard me say earlier, to change the game across our entire territories and have everything recycled or reused by 2020. Now, there are a lot of things we can do to do that, but ultimately, we've got to work hand in hand. There are 400 plus municipalities, cities in Britain alone. Each one of them has its own separate and different program. We're actively working with some of those that are most encouraging to try to figure out how do you really make the system work? Because at the end of the day, you've got to have consumers making the right choices. You know, we've looked at a lot of systems around the world. Those that are governmental-led at the federal level tend to be very, very cumbersome and expensive. So we need to find the right cost balance, and it's ultimately up to us and governments to work with consumers to make sure they understand what the benefit is of doing this to them and to the environment.
Tim, yours is a corporation that's become very successful by giving the customer what he or she wants. How can you make them, encourage them, nudge them, seduce them into wanting something more sustainable?
Well, you know, as we said earlier, I think it is about the opportunity to build the sustainability promise into the brand's DNA. In the end, consumers are loyal to brands. Brands stand for a collection of emotional and physical functional benefits. And if one of those benefits can be that this brand believes in promoting the well-being of our planet, that's a very powerful motivation for purchase. And in the end, for, you know, what we like to say in a very positive way, irrational loyalty to the brand, that regardless of price, those collection of benefits, you know, supersede and clearly outweigh the cost associated with purchase. And again, we've talked a couple of examples in our company where we've done that. Clearly, John's having very similar success with Coca-Cola. And I think for the marketing world, they are increasingly waking up to the notion of sustainability as a growth driver. Sustainability clearly is the right thing to do for the planet. It is, as Harriet said earlier, it is unequivocally for us a strategic imperative because of the simple math that when you look at cocoa or coffee and current production trends versus demand trends, there's a point now, if we don't correct and accelerate the sustained sourcing of it, that it will cross and that will skyrocket price. So it's a strategic imperative, a business imperative for us. But to those brands and businesses like my fellow panelists here, who then build that into the promise of that brand, be it an M&S, a Coca-Cola, a Cadbury Dairy Milk, then you can engender that type of loyalty with your consumers where price does become less of an issue.
You're talking the talk, you're walking the walk, you're doing all these incredible things, but do your products actually bear the burden of all this high-flown stuff? You know, it's a chocolate bar. What emotional baggage does a chocolate bar carry with it? And do you really think people are going to eat a chocolate bar and say, I'm saving the planet? I mean, how much weight of these kind of big ideas can the things you make actually bear?
Well, in a separate panel, I'd love to talk to you about the emotional connection between consumers and chocolate. But you're absolutely right. I mean, we shouldn't take ourselves too seriously. After all, it's just a chocolate bar. It's a can of Coke, etc. But I think for consumers, it is a chance for her to make a difference every day in a very little way. And it's very easy for her or him to make that statement. It's not a big badge. It's not something to run down the street and yell about, but it is a part of the way that she views in little simple ways, the way she treats herself and her family. She feels better about it, and I think it matters.
Richard, no company works in a bubble, certainly not Marks and Spencer. To what extent do customers buy into this, really? I mean, how much have they bought into this Plan A business? Do you have any clear idea of the extent to which you've actually engaged your customers as opposed to your staff and the strategy of the company in the whole idea?
I think we've touched on this already. I think that we understand the customers' care. We understand that the customers at the point of purchase may care about some other things at a higher degree of priority. But what we do know is that they do care. What we also know is that by the end of last year, a third of our products had some form of sustainable attribute that they were made in an eco-factory, they were Fairtrade, they were organic, and so our product offer is in itself, without the customer knowing necessarily, building a contribution that they're making to sustainability. I think for us it's about integrating it into all of our business, and I think Tim put that extremely well. There's the longer term strategic play about the viability of a business that sells foods to a consumer who in the UK, the government statistics would tell us that the consumer wastes a third of all the food they buy, and sourced from agricultural markets around the world that are seeing upward pressure. And in a fashion business that over the last 20 or 30 years, the consumer has embraced fashion, fast fashion, more disposability in clothing. So for us, there's a strategic play about the future of meeting those customers' needs as customers' needs change. And then there's an immediate brand play, which is understanding what the Marks & Spencer brand means to its consumer, because it means something different to its consumer today than it did in the 1940s, 1950s, and 1960s, because consumers today are living in a very different context. So as us, it's making sure that brand is relevant, that we are continued to be one of Britain's most trusted retail brands, and as part of that trust contract with the consumer, they would expect us to be doing this, expect us to be doing this heavy lifting.
David, to what extent, from Tesco's point, I mean, Tesco must presumably analyse the attitudes of its customers on this issue as on many others, I'm sure. But to what extent do you think the customers have actually bought into this? Or to what extent do the customers, you know, it's quite interesting, the whole climate change debate seems to go up and down as scepticism peaks and then falls off again. I mean, to what extent is the customer buying into it, even if the corporation itself has adopted the whole idea and is actually walking the walk? Are the customers?
Customers will buy into it if you give them the opportunity to do so, and you make it affordable, you make it accessible, you make it exciting. I remember something Tesco did a few years ago now, rather than just giving carrier bags away free as we did. We gave customers one green club card point. It's worth about a penny. And most people will be familiar with our club card scheme in the UK. So you got the equivalent of a penny if you reuse the bag rather than taking a new one. And what happened with that was we very quickly got to 50, 60. I think at one stage we got to about a 70% reduction in bags. So a scheme where people feel they're doing something together with others and they get a little bit of an incentive and a little bit of a lift, you can achieve quite big things. Now, carrier bags won't solve the planet. It's a bit like your question, Michael, to Tim about the weight that a chocolate bar can carry. But what you find is that customers then get a bit of momentum. They feel that that it's not hopeless. That actually they're beginning to. It's like anything. It's like when we used to be doing our exams as kids, and if you didn't start doing your revision, you sort of got depressed. Whereas if you started, you built a bit of momentum. So you reuse your carrier bags. Next thing you find you're recycling more, whether it's the retailer helping you or the council. So you recycle a bit more, then you might buy a bit more Fairtrade, and that's the way it goes. Now,
but how many, sorry to interrupt you, but how many of your customers said, there's Tesco cutting its costs at my expense? They've stopped actually giving me something that they gave before.
I think on the whole, folks are less cynical than that, thankfully.
Than journalists are, yeah.
Where they get cynical is actually on your question about the weight that can be attached to a chocolate bar, if Tim will forgive me mentioning a chocolate bar again. What people don't understand is what they can really do. And I mean, just a couple of figures. If you look at the entire Tesco direct footprint, which is our stores and our distribution centres in the UK, it's about 5 million tonnes of CO2. If you then look, and a lot of our discussion has been about the value chain, the supply chain, that's probably about 10 times the carbon emissions that goes into producing, processing, distributing, chilling, etc., bringing products to the shops. So about 10 times our footprint. So all the work that my colleagues have been talking about is vastly important. Then there's your focus for a lot of this session, Michael, which is on the consumer, where consumer emissions are about 100 times the direct foot in a country like the UK, about 100 times at least the direct footprint of a business like Tesco. It isn't, however, in whether they choose, again, if Tim will forgive me, one chocolate bar over another. It's actually about how we heat our homes, how much we drive our cars, which cars we drive, how often we fly, whether we use public transport, how many televisions we have in our homes. Those are the really big areas of emissions. But again, all of our businesses can play a part, because we can show leadership, as Richard said. We can collaborate, as Tim and John were describing. We can have guidance from the Fairtrade Foundation, etc. And governments need to get stuck in as well on the really big areas of emissions.
John, to what extent are your customers engaged? To what extent will your customers buy Coca-Cola rather than the other product? It's probably a crime to mention in public in London at the moment, but won't go into that. Because they think that your track record on all this is better than any competitor you might have. Well, just to be clear, customers, and we'll distinguish between customers and consumers. Our customers, two big ones sitting over here, they're vitally interested in what we're doing and have huge demands, which Tim and I spend a lot of time working with them on, and make sure that we're doing as much as we can in parallel and in complementary fashions to tackle sustainability. From a consumer standpoint, as we've been talking, it's a bigger challenge. Consumers expect brands they love, whether it's Cadbury or Coke. They expect us to be outstanding citizens in all ways. And that includes sustainability. It includes the brand, the love, the pleasure they get from drinking or eating it, the experience, what it says about them as a person. But because of that, they have huge expectations of the company and the brand. And so I think it's difficult to say that they're going to buy one brand over another one because of sustainability. I really don't think that's necessarily the case. But they do have clear demands and expectations around what we should be doing. And we've got to constantly do everything we possibly can to meet and exceed those expectations. And one of the things, consumer education is a critical part of it. And for example, in our arena, one of the things we were very first out of the box to do is to put all kinds of caloric information on the front, on the principal display panel, much to the chagrin of a lot of our marketing people, so that consumers know precisely how many calories are in any particular product they buy. We think that is absolutely the right thing. It's all about consumer choice. And so giving consumers the right information so they can make the right choice, again, is something they expect and something we need to be on the leading edge in doing. So I think the responsibility is more on us, frankly, than it is on the consumers. But if they ever get disappointed, we're in serious trouble. So it's what they expect from a brand like Coke or Cadbury. Tim, can you add to that?
I think John's absolutely right. I think, sustainability increasingly cannot be used, cannot be thought of as a source of competitive advantage. If we do this right, if we come together across these industries, again, with our partners in government and so on, we will be raising the bar for everyone. And everyone's going to benefit from it, all consumers, all brands, et cetera. I think there are some, and some of us on the panel here are some representatives that are leading the way, and there's a period of time that I think there is additional goodwill that will be credited to those brands and those companies. I think John said it very well in some of his opening remarks. It comes down to leadership. I mean, I think those of us on the panel today clearly have put a stake in the ground that it is about leadership, it's about commitment. Yes, it's an investment. That investment, in our experience, I can't tell you that the ROI, the return on investment in year one, is a glorious financial return. But I'm absolutely, unequivocally committed that over the long term it is. And so I think John's right. It's not, over the long term, it's not necessarily a source of competitive advantage, but it's clearly the right thing to do. It's good for our brands and our business.